are here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School on the post of the War College. Did they call it today?
War College, some of the locals call it post.
It was the first Indian boarding school system run by the federal government / the military, run by the authorities. And it was opened in 1879 by Colonel Richard Henry Pratt, who fought during the Indian Wars. At the end of the Indian Wars, Pratt thought he was the one who came up with the concept of taking the Indian out of the Indian in order to assimilate them, which was a total failed policy. His idea was to take the Indian children off the reservations and put them in military-style schools way far away from home and keep them from speaking their language, wearing that traditional clothing, keep them away from their families, their parents. And this was the first school that was opened. It was opened in 1879, and it paved the way for a whole network of national policy to do this to Indian children, which was probably more devastating than the Trail of Tears. So here we are at the entrance of the cemetery. Every Indian boarding school, federal Indian boarding school, has a children's cemetery attached to it because children died in the boarding schools. They were not sent home to be buried. They died from all sorts of things, a lot of times from diseases that they had not built up immunities to, being taken from lands far away, as far away as the west. Here we're in Pennsylvania. Others died of terrible causes. I have no idea what the history of the Carlisle Indian School. I hope it's not as horrific as some of the stories I've heard. But the children were abused, they were neglected. To do some more research to find out how these children died. But nonetheless, they weren't sent home. There is a group of Native Americans who made a journey of every Native American boarding school children's cemetery, because every single one has a children's cemetery. They visited every one and ended up here at Carlisle as the last one visited, because it was the first one open, before going on to Washington, D.C. They had collected petition signatures all along the way, looking for an apology to Native Americans for this policy. As you can see, they don't put the birth dates of these children, just their death dates.
Just when they died.
So we have no idea how old they were. And they're from all over the country. We have Comanche, Apache, Sioux, Nez Perce, Cheyenne. It looks like they're going in chronological order. First one, 1887. They do not have their Indian names here. It looks like they've put the Christian names that they've given them on the gravestones. And of course the Christian cross. This is a very important place for Native Americans because it is the first of the policy of removing the Indian from the Indian that they still are suffering from and trying to heal from to this day. Oneida, Shawnee, Mission, Seneca,
There's a
Sioux,
Young Eagle.
One has a native name.
Says a native name. Young Eagle. Over there.
Ophelia. This is not the original site of the cemetery. It's actually, and we'll go visit that site. The graves were removed in, I don't know, it was 1950s, and placed here to make room for a building.
Thomas Marshall. 1876 to 1899, I think it says.
I don't know whose stone that is. It doesn't look like a child's stone.
No, that does not.
All over the country, treating Native Americans as if they were one culture. All of these cultures, they spoke different languages, they practiced different religions, different forms of government, had 10,000-year-old cultures different from one another. But that wasn't recognized by European Americans. They were seen, especially by the 19th century European Americans, as simply Indians. Here's we have some unknown
What's the significance of the coins?
I don't know.
There's another unknown.
I can tell you that the shells are sacred. The shell obviously has had probably sage burned in it as part of perhaps a healing ceremony.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 unknowns.
Here's a symbol of the four directions, Native American symbol that's almost universal in Native American tribes. It represents the sacred four directions, north, south, east, and west. So obviously, Native Americans have been here recently to honor their dead. Especially the unknowns. It's beautiful.
There's 9 of them.
It's heartbreaking. So we're still at the Children's Cemetery, and we end up with this one stone of Fred Sinapi, who's a tribal member of the Sac and Fox in Oklahoma, base tribe now. And that is the tribe that Jim Thorpe is from. And that's the reason why we're here today, is to honor Jim Thorpe, the greatest athlete of the 20th century, perhaps of all time, who won 2 gold medals in the 1912 Olympics, and won it for the decathlon and the pentathlon. It's never been done before or since. And we're doing research on Jim Thorpe, but we're also doing research on the Carlisle Indian School that he attended. He was on the football team, the track team, the basketball team, and the baseball team. Here we are in the very gymnasium that Jim Thorpe practiced as a student at the Carlisle Indian School. It is the original wooden beams. This is so very exciting because Jim Thorpe was first and foremost a track athlete. Now we have with us a gentleman who works here at the gym who just told us a fascinating story. And we're going to go back to the Smithsonian and find out if this story is true. And I think it is true, just by my instincts. He said that there's a story on campus that the way Pop Warner discovered Jim Thorpe's athletic prowess is that he saw him here on campus chasing down a horse. And he caught the horse, he could catch the horse, he caught the horse, and he said, bring me that guy. Fast runner. I think it's a true story because Jim Thorpe's father was a horse rancher. And Jim Thorpe grew up with horses from an infant. And he worked with his father his whole life until I think he was about 9, 10, maybe even 12 years old. And he did indeed chase horses. They literally caught wild horses, brought them back, and trained them. So I bet you anything that story is true. I can't imagine growing up with horses and then taking out of that environment, put here, not having a horse, seeing some horses in a field and chasing after one, grabbing it. Yeah, that's a horseman. That's Jim Thorpe.
So what are you going to do now?
This track is the same track that Jim Thorpe practiced. Jim Thorpe is the only athlete ever to win the decathlon and the pentathlon. 1912 U.S. Olympics, Stockholm, Sweden, 100 years ago. I'm going to take a victory lap with him.
Oh, God. Jesus. Raise your hands in the air. Woo!
What a feeling! I'm gonna cry. It's amazing how the floor slopes sometimes. Is that typical of all running tracks?
That was engineered as, time and all these modified that.
Oh my gosh. I can't tell you how excited I am. This is amazing. But here we are at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School's original athletic field. This is the track that Jim Thorpe used to run around and the football field that he played on. It's also the site of the bleachers, the stand, and the reason why we're pointing that out to you is that the original cemetery of the students, Indian students who died, is actually behind this stadium, not earlier where we showed you. They moved the graves in, I think, what the 1950s to make room for a building. And so we can't film back there but because of security, but in fact, behind this building is the site of the original children's cemetery. And as I said, all Indian boarding schools had a children's cemetery because they didn't send the children home if they died, and a lot of children did die. They died of disease, but they also died of neglect and abuse. I don't know of any stories at Indian Carlisle School of neglect and abuse, but I'm not a scholar, and our scholars are going to be looking into all of that. Here we are at the Indian field. This field was built by and for the Indian athletes of the Carlisle Indian School, which opened in 1879 and closed in 1918. On this field, such greats as Jim Thorpe, Frank Mount Pleasant, Louis Tawanama, Isaac Seneca, James Johnson, Frank Hudson, Charles Chief Fender, Lone Star Dietz, and Bemis Pierce gained athletic fame. Now we are told by people who work on post that the original site of the Indian Carlisle Industrial School's burial ground for the students who died while in attendance here is actually behind the stadium. They was moved, we were told by the workers, the graves were moved to where we were originally by the side of the road. to make room for this building here.